Okay, my truism was that total energy independence is impossible in the United States, and that's the issue I'm going to be addressing, whether or not that's actually true. And so think of all the different aspects in this idea. The idea that total energy independence it's one that people have concentrated on for a really long time, ever since economics has existed and ever since energy production has existed. And it's an intriguing concept, whether a country could sustain itself for a really long time, forever, even on its own, without relying on other countries. And I can't think of one example of a country that does it right now. Most countries our world's very interconnected, so we rely on other countries. But I think economically, socially, and environmentally, this is possible. And I will tell you. Question, what percentage of America's oil do you guys think is imported? Just any?
89%.
89, okay. Good numbers. That's about what most people think, like 89, 95%, 75 even. Most people think much more than half. Actually, only 45% of our oil that we use is imported from other countries. And I wrote there that 40.3% of our energy production is petroleum, and then oil, and then 45% of that is imported from other countries, which is a lot lower than a lot of people think. As you see, it's nowhere near 89, 90%. It's half that. So most people have this idea that we're so reliant on other countries to begin with, and while we are, it's a lot less than people think. So for the general public, we're kind of already on our way to relying less on foreign fuel. And most of the oil, or not most of, but a lot of the oil that we do import comes from Canada and Mexico, too. Canada has large oil reserves, so out of that 45% that we do import, not all of it is from the Middle East or Iran. This big, crazy infographic shows the percentages of U.S. energy use in 2011 from each different subject. Petroleum, we see here at 35.3%. The other one, I think, was the year before, said about 40%, and they're different numbers, but they're close enough to give you a picture of how much we use the petroleum. Coal and natural gas are two very large ones also. And unfortunately, at the very top, we see all of our renewable resources, such as wind, hydro, and solar, coming in at a whopping 0.15%. So most of our energy is oil, coal, and natural gas. This graph is pretty crazy. It's obviously a gigantic problem. The ratio of our production and imports for oil. And right about when we were born, we came in at exactly the wrong time because the U.S. decided to switch them, and that is a big problem for our economy. It's, I think, one of the biggest problems. If we want to keep moving towards energy independence and doing things ourselves, this is not the way to go. It's fine. Part of it also is that in the Middle East, oil is a lot cheaper than it is in the U.S., and so are the production methods. So that goes back to the whole issue of cheaper labor in the U.S. versus abroad. However, it's not all that bad. In the past couple of years, since 2009, our domestic production of crude oil has actually increased. Not by tons, but it has increased. I believe there's tighter restrictions on government lands, so I believe drilling is up, like fracking on private land. So that's where you hear a lot about fracking, the shale, and everything. And private people, I mean, among citizens. So the numbers are actually decreasing, and green energy has provided a lot of kind of a catalyst for that. there are more people moving towards green energies is the way to go now. People are moving into that a lot. And although green energy isn't really capable of sustaining our entire energy usage for a really long time, it's still worth looking at, and a lot of people are realizing it. One of the things that's helping us become more energy independent is better technology that we're using to get the energy out of our resources. Machines and processes to burn coal and petroleum and fossil fuels are becoming more efficient. And so that means we have to drill for less oil, we can get the same amount of energy out of less now that our technology is increasing, so we can tap into the resources that we have in our own backyard instead of other people's. The numbers on how much of the world's oil resources in the USA differ. The proven resources are around 2.5%, but what people don't realize is there's a lot more than just that number. This is the graph of the proven oil resources or reserves as a percentage of the world total. So see, North America is kind of lower, and there's the second lowest, and everyone sees the Middle East is above half. And that's kind of what most people think all the time, is that the Middle East has all the oil and we're not really sitting on any. Still 5.5 is a lot, but I found this picture which is kind of, it shows a little bit more of the picture. The bottom two parts aren't really the best source. They're not as credible as the top two, but it still shows that there's a lot more in the US that we can tap into. The 400 billion barrels of technically recoverable crude oil show a really good possibility for us to mine and get at that, compared to in the Middle East. I think the entire Middle East, their numbers are around 300 billion barrels of oil. So if that number is correct, and we can get that 422 billion, that'll put America over the Middle East. So that shows how it's possible for us to use our own resources in harvesting. Another method is obtaining gas from coal. And the methods to do this have been around for years. The thing is, gasoline produced from coal costs a lot more than gas is normally costed. It's about $4 a gallon for that gasoline. And before, a couple years ago, when gas was around $2 a gallon or even less, it never made economic sense to do that, because why would you expend more money and more resources to make gasoline in a way that is going to cost more for the consumer? So it never made sense. But now that we're seeing gas prices around almost $4 a gallon, people are starting to look at that as an alternative to gasoline in order to protect our natural resources. And North America has a much larger coal supply of natural gas by 4 times, which is tons. Adam Smith and the invisible hand. His idea that the invisible hand represents the self-regulating behavior of the marketplace is represented well with the coal and gasoline. The balance that can be brought by new methods of coal and gasoline production are an example of that. Basically, when the economics allow it, the science will follow. So when it's economically sound to use new methods, the science will catch up, and we can get back to that and keep everything at a relatively same equilibrium price. And here I've included a picture of the invisible hand. In 2012, January of 2012, BP released their projection that the U.S. would be approaching total energy independence by 2030. And BP is a pretty credible source. They're a pretty big company. They know what they're talking about. And the reasons they said this could happen is the more efficient technology, processes, deteriorating foreign relations. Like, we're not really on good terms with Iran right now, so it's kind of tough to be taking their oil when they want to kill us. So that's a big part of it, and the push for green energy. And I actually have a couple pages to look at in this report because it's it is a big deal that BP is talking about this. So I have 2 pages of the report. This one is talking about the Americas, so North and South America, playing an expanding role in the oil market. The 3rd bullet point is a pretty important one. It says supply from the Americas will expand, and advances in drilling technologies unlock additional resources in Canadian oil and blah, blah. So they're saying that supply in oil production from the Americas will increase due to the increasing technology that we're talking about. And one more. This chart is a good one. It shows the conventional gas, and moving into 2030, it says that shale gas is going to be going from about a quarter of what we use to more than half. And that is kind of representative of all this fracking stuff that's going on, because that uses shale gas. This is another infographic. It just shows that this is where we are right now, well, 2010, so 2 years ago, and their projections were that oil will be decreasing slightly and coal will just skyrocket. So, kind of the trend of moving away. So in conclusion, I believe that total energy independence from the U.S. is possible, and to achieve it, there's a lot of things that we have to do that will be hard, but short term, we have to reduce our level of oil imports and increase oil drilling in America. We can't keep with, you guys saw the chart where they were flipped. We can't keep up with that. We can't keep using other people's resources and ignoring our own and expect that to work economically. And long term, we have to look into other production techniques as well as green energy, because sooner or later the non-renewable resources are going to run out. So we have to know what to do. It's going to be a long time in the future, and I think it's tough, but it is possible. So that will address my truism, and there are my resources.
Mr. Cassidy, could you put the slide back up that shows U.S. and foreign oil production, please?
Yes, I can. Which slide is that?
The graph of U.S. and foreign oil production.
This one?
Yes.
The really scary one?
I think you made a couple of key points. If I heard you correctly, one is that the amount of oil that is technically recoverable under the United States is approximately equal to that in the Mideast. And another point you made is that often science has to follow the economics.
Yeah.
When I look at this chart, I notice around 1970 that imports jumped dramatically, and shortly thereafter, particularly in the 80s and beyond, that domestic production of oil begins to decline. But at the same time, you've made the point that the amount of oil available is approximately equal. How do you explain this shift for sourcing of oil?
Well, a big part of it is the labor. There's a difference between American labor and drilling, and regulations here that prevent drilling in certain places, and that in the Middle East and other foreign countries such as Mexico and Canada. So I think that's a really big part of it. And in the 70s, I think you were talking about how the companies got together with, a bunch of American companies got together with foreign companies to work out imports.
Okay, a couple things. At the beginning you said you haven't thought of a country that has done this yet. Brazil is actually energy independent.
Yeah.
I didn't know if you knew that, but I wanted to put that out there. And then, okay, I see where you're coming from with all of this. We have the resources to do this in the short term. And I'm not going to argue that for the next 5 years we could go energy independent if we really wanted to, because I see that's possible. But you didn't talk about like renewable energy resources. And if you're arguing that we could go energy independent like exponentially, we have the oil and the coal and the natural gas to do it in the short term. But do you really think it's possible in the long term? Because eventually our natural reserves are gonna run out, and we're gonna have to rely on hydro and wind and solar. And that chart on the next slide up shows we haven't developed those at all.
No, we haven't. And that was one of my main points. I said it's going to be tough, and it's probably going to be a long time in the future. But at the very end, when I said short term, you're right. We have to, decrease, and then sooner or later, our oil reserves and coal reserves, they're going to run out. It's non-renewable resources. That's what they mean. We're not there. Once we use them all, there won't be any more. So I think it's really scary that how dependent we are on the non-renewable resources and how much we kind of really just ignore the non-renewable resources. But at the same time, the non-renewable resources generate a lot less power. At full production, with the technology that we have now, solar and wind would be somewhere around 10% of our entire energy needs. So I think a lot of technology advancement is needed to get that up. And I'm in engineering, and the whole reason I did this is because we just